Do you think peace is possible?
Clearly, the Ezekiel 38 passage occurs prior to the second coming of Christ. The second reason it's so well known, it appears to allude to nuclear weapons. Second thing it leaps out at you is the motivation isn't spoiled. It's to wipe Israel off the map. Iran is after a nuclear weapon for reasons most people don't realize. Those of us that have a heart for Israel tremble because of a nuclear Iran is a threat to Israel. What most people are not aware of is a 1,400-year war.
Guys, this is absolutely crazy. 13 years ago, Chuck Missler was asked about the peace in the Middle East and all of the implications that Israel has with Revelations and the Battle of Armageddon. And guys, this is absolutely applicable to what is going on in Israel right now. So let's get right into it. Absolutely fascinating.
I want to focus in on Israel.
Good.
I've been spending a lot of time lately on the Middle East situation. In fact, I just completed a short book and I'm expanding it on is peace possible in the Middle East? Because not only do you have the historic enemies of Israel, the countries surrounding Israel, but then all of these terrorist groups now that Israel has to deal with inside of their own land. And of course, the constant pressure to give away land. We know that land for peace doesn't work. We see that with the Gaza Strip, which has become a staging ground now for military attacks. Do you think peace is possible?
No, I don't think so. Not until
Really?
Israel returns to their source, which is God Himself. And I see that in the last verse of Hosea 5, verse 15, where God speaking through Hosea says, "I will return to my place," which is an interesting phrase. That must mean He left it. I must return to my place until they acknowledge their offense. That's singular and specific, namely the rejection. In their affliction, they will seek me earnestly. And so to me, that verse clarifies the whole role, and it also tells me what the so-called Great Tribulation is really about.
Matthew 23, you will not see me again.
Exactly.
You who dwell in Jerusalem until you say,
Exactly.
Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is you comes in the name of the Lord.
So in the meantime, though, I think God has a lot to say about those people who would dare to partition His land. So we'll be watching. I personally, ask me what my perspective is. I don't see any peace until the Prince of Peace comes. In the meantime, though, God still has His hand on them.
Yeah, and very clearly. Wow. I want to target Ezekiel 38 and 39 for a few minutes.
This is absolutely fascinating how he ties all of this in. But this is 13 years ago, and now all of this is still happening within the Middle East, and the conflict is rising, and more crazy, awful things are happening in today's society. And guys, let me tell you, we need to keep on trusting in God. Are we in the end times? I would love to know what you guys think, if you think we are, but it's getting crazy.
I'm very clear on Romans 9 through 11. As a Jewish believer, that's my life. My heart's desire and prayer for Israel is that they might be saved. And helping Christians to understand that God still loves the Jewish people. He's faithful to the Jewish people. And we can base our trust in God being faithful to us on His faithfulness to the Jewish people. But the whole Gog-Magog Armageddon scenario has really been a challenge for me. In fact, Chuck, I shared with you that it brought me into eventual salvation because I was drawn to go to a Bible study that was talking about the book of Revelation and how the world comes to an end. As a Jewish druggie looking for the meaning of life, I found that very intriguing and bumped into Yeshua along the way there.
Sure.
But I'm really, I reread these today in preparation for our time together. I want you to talk specifically about Gog, Magog, Tubal, and Meshach. Who are these figures in Ezekiel 38 and 39?
Well, let's take the first one, which is a very strange word, the word Gog, because it's very unusual in the Bible to have a very key player emerge without some background.
Right.
And suddenly we're confronted with Gog in Ezekiel 38. But I've stumbled into an interesting passage in Amos chapter 7, verse 1, which if you read in your English Bible doesn't make any sense at all. But if you read it in the Septuagint, which it's amazing to me that more people don't lean on the Septuagint because you're talking about a 900-year advantage over the Masoretes.
You are in
Right.
250 BC.
Yeah, and so we have, there it identifies Gog as the king of the locusts. Now, locusts we're not talking about natural locusts, because Proverbs, I think it's 30:27, says that the locusts have no king. When you study Revelation 9, you find the word locust there used idiomatically of demons, obviously.
Wow.
And so that all comes up if you're studying Revelation 9. Well, when you hit Amos 7:1 in the Septuagint, and you discover Gog is a title of a demon king, not necessarily the number one guy, but obviously one of his key lieutenants or whatever, it clarifies a number of things, because there's another mystery about Gog and Magog, because it shows up twice. Clearly, the Ezekiel 38 passage occurs prior to the second coming of Christ.
Wow.
And yet, after 1,000 years, after the millennium, we see an allusion made to Gog and Magog again. For Magog to be around 1,000 years later, well, that's the name of a people, ethnologically. But Gog is a title. It makes sense when you realize Gog is a title of a demon king. So
That's crazy. So Gog is a title of a demon king who will rise up. That's insane, and that's who the locusts are referring to. And I think this is so fascinating, thinking about this is the Septuagint. Why not go to the original source? So many people are like, the King James Bible is the most reliable, but it was written, I believe, not from the Septuagint, because we didn't find the Septuagint back then. When we found it, now it's older. Yeah, it says the King James Bible, published in 1611, translated from Hebrew Greek. Septuagint is generally considered older than the Masoretic text. Exactly. He's going to get into here now the war and everything.
It illuminates that mystery. But getting back to the question, Gog is simply the leader, the demonic leader of Magog. It may be idiomatic of or maybe a specific person, or it may be idiomatically used of the group. The real issue is, who's Magog, one of the sons of Japheth. And so what you're confronted with, of course, in Ezekiel 38, is all these different peoples are mentioned by their forebears. And they have to be. Because see, you and I, we keep changing the names of things. You know, and if you're Isaiah and God called you to talk about the Persian Empire 100 years before it shows up in history, how do you talk about it? Right. By Elam, you speak of their forebears. And you mentioned you were in St. Petersburg. You know, there's a city that keeps changing its name, whether it's Leningrad or Petersburg, Petrograd, depends on what year you're talking about. My Russian friends say in Russia even the past is uncertain. You know, so who is Magog? Magog is the descendants of Magog is our challenge. We fortunately have several key sources. Hesiod, which is a Greek didactic poet, speaks, and actually slightly ahead of Ezekiel in time, speaks of the descendants of Magog as the Scythians. Herodotus, who's known as the father of history, writes extensively about the descendants of Magog, namely the Scythians. And so we would associate them to the people, the southern steppes of Russia. Some would say Russia in general, could be, but more specifically it's the southern steppes. But what's interesting is you go through those tribes, they're armed and led, according to Ezekiel, by Magog. Well, that's exactly who is arming and leading those various peoples even today. One reason that Ezekiel 38 is so prominent to most Bible students is for two reasons. One is this attempted invasion is intervened. God intervenes that attack, and that in itself is significant because he very overtly is preventing that going forward. The second reason it's so well known, it appears to allude to nuclear weapons. When you get to chapter 39, which is the cleanup after the battle.
He's saying that Ezekiel alludes to nuclear weapons and what is going on in the Middle East right now with Iran. Nuclear weapons? That's crazy.
Discover that they wait 7 months before entering. Oh, first of all, there are hailstones of fire and all these cosmic things happening. But then they hire professionals to clear the battlefield. They wait 7 months before entering the battlefield. Then they take 7 months to clear the battlefield. And the Holy Spirit even adds something in chapter 39. If a passenger passing through that area sees something that the professionals, what the professionals do, they clear the battlefield and they bury what they find east of the Dead Sea. Read that downwind. And if somebody passing through that area sees something the professionals have missed, he doesn't touch it. He marks the location, lets the professionals deal with it. You know, that is very contemporary procedures. Anybody that's been briefed in nuclear, biological, chemical warfare knows the drill. And so that kind of language in Ezekiel 39 catches your attention. Because again, see, my premise is there's nothing in there accidental. Everything in there is deliberate.
Wow.
And I think that, to me at least, I infer that we're talking about very contemporary weapons technology. But the
Yeah, and he thinks that the Bible was written or inspired by people, inspired by God, written by 40 different people. But how in the world would they know exactly what's going on? Because it must have been inspired by someone that is outside of time, that is in the future, past, present. He knows all things.
Now, the big debate about that passage is, does it occur? See, very competent scholars like Hal Lindsey and others see that whole event as part of the Armageddon scenario, as outlined in Daniel 11, that it's part of the climactic end. There are some of us, and I side with them, that believe the Ezekiel 38 event occurs before the 70th week of Daniel. It's not part of the Armageddon scenario, in fact. And there's some technical reasons we hold that view. Doesn't mean we're right or wrong. It's not my point. My point is there are good scholars that have different views exactly where that places. But I think what most people have overlooked is Psalm 83, because there's an event that occurs prior, I believe, to the Ezekiel 38 event.
Really?
The Ezekiel 38 event, if you go through all those tribes and try to identify them, they're an outer ring of peoples. What's strange, and their motivation in Ezekiel 38 is taking spoil. Gold, silver, cattle, and goods. They see that as that's their motivation, is to take advantage. When you get to Psalm 83, there's two things that leap out at you. One is that the players there are not the same players as Ezekiel 38. In fact, they're the immediate neighbors. Second thing that leaps out at you is the motivation isn't spoil. It's to wipe Israel off the map.
Wow.
So as you read Psalm 83, it's rather startling because it sounds like it's drawn from current headlines.
Yeah. And him talking about this whole topic 13 years ago is now, it's like he's talking about today. He's talking about today. That's what it seems like. People want to completely destroy Israel off the face of the map. And I can play devil's advocate here. During World War II, people probably thought that this was the end of the world. Wars and rumors of wars. Or maybe it's just growing pains again. You know, times are getting crazy for the coming of Christ. I would love to know what you guys think for sure.
You see, Ahmadinejad sent, wiping Israel off the map. When I first heard him,
sworn to do.
When I first heard him say that, I rejoiced. That's the first time I ever heard them admit they were on their map.
Wow.
So, but the point is,
Only a prophecy teacher rejoices at such a...
no, well, but the point really is that the immediate neighbors confederate with the specific objective of wiping off the map. And the psalmist, last of the Asaph Psalms, calls for God to deal with that. And so there is a scenario that's inferred here, is that Israel will succeed against them. God is going to, and that creates the prosperity that causes them to be a target for Ezekiel 38.
So two separate events.
Wow.
Yes.
One that Israel prospers in that ultimately brings about the efforts for total destruction.
And my view, and I mentioned there aren't many that hold this view, I should admit very quickly. Bill Salas, who wrote a good book, a couple of others hold this view.
We've had Bill on the program.
Okay, well, so I hold
and
that.
Steve Spillman, another one who...
Sure. But if Israel, and now there's another piece of the scenario that's speculative, and so I don't know if we should even get into this about Iran and the nuclear capability of Iran.
We might as well.
Okay, all right.
13 years ago, they talked about nuclear capability with Iran, and now, today, still the same thing. Israel strikes nuclear plants.
Iran is after a nuclear weapon for reasons most people don't realize. Those of us that have a heart for Israel tremble because of a nuclear Iran is a threat to Israel. What most people are not aware of is a 1,400-year war that's about to erupt.
A 1400?
See, most of us that know a little bit about Islam, most of us know very little about Islam. That's the first mistake. But secondly, don't realize there are two houses that hate each other almost as much as they hate the Jews. And the
Which has been of help to Israel, by the way.
Yes, well, the Shiites and the Sunnis, and the conventional wisdom, there's about 80% of Islam is Sunni, 20% is Shiite. That's because the Shiites are not counted in a Sunni country. We don't know how many Shiites there are, but Shiites are primarily Iranians and Yemen.
Oh.
Now, this war started with a dinner. Some say it was lamb, some say it was goat, but it was poison. When Muhammad took that first bite, he spit it out. He knew it was poison, but it was too late. He died. And the succession after him split the house in two houses.
What? So Muhammad? Wait, he's talking about the Prophet Muhammad died from poison? Islamic sources suggest that Prophet Muhammad felt the lingering effects of poison in his final illness, leading to the belief among some Muslims that he ultimately died from its impact.
That started wars that have gone on for 1,400 years. And so, but we need to understand the mindset of Iran. This isn't a third world country. This is a country that ruled the world at one time.
Huh.
Persia held off the Roman Empire for 300 years.
And very few know that the Arab world are terrified of Iran.
Exactly.
In fact.
And that's another mistake that we
they're not Arabs.
Not to use the word Arab when the word we really want to use is Muslim. Okay, so, but understand how much, you have to understand how much the Shiites hate the Sunnis. And they remember vividly when Saudi Arabia funded Iraq to throw chemical warfare against Iran in the 8-year. The other myth that gets promoted is that if it wasn't for Israel, we'd have peace in the Middle East. That's utter nonsense. Take Israel out of the picture for a minute. You had an 8-year war between Iraq and Iran. It had nothing to do with Israel. And so the point is the hatred of the Shiites see a chance to regain their previous dominance. And the nuclear weapon, their primary use of it would be against Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that's crazy, because I'm going to be reacting to another video here of Saudi Arabia talking about Iran and how they dislike each other.
You look at if you watch the news today, you're aware of the business in Yemen. You need to stand back and realize that Iran controls the southern third of Iraq, where most of the oil is. And you look at all this from the point of Saudi Arabia, they're surrounded. They got Yemen coming from, well, first of all, Iran controls the Straits of Hormuz. 90% of the Middle East oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz. Through Yemen, they also have the Gate of Tears. So, and Yemen is on the south edge of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is terrified right now. Now, the United States is supporting Saudi Arabia, but exactly where that's all going to head. Now, stop and realize, if we're in a speculative mood, what President Obama could accomplish if he chose to take out the nuclear capability of Iran. Overnight, he would become the hero to most of the Muslim world, the Sunnis. He also could turn on his heel to Netanyahu and say, now you owe me one. So,
a big one.
A big one. So, and as you look at the emergent capability now it's been stalled thanks to cyber warfare by, we assume, Israel, the nuclear capability, but that's just a stall. How are we going to prevent?
Nobody's referring to the virus that.
Brilliant. Right. That's a whole other part of the story. But so what I guess I'm getting at is a suspicion I hold. If that should happen, the strong suit, militarily speaking, of Israel is a tank corps, and if they had the backbone and the guts to go after the Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south and use that opportunity while that's going on, just to seal off their borders and say to the world, up yours, and we're a nation now.
Beep.
Yep. Yeah. Beep.
Wow.
Beep. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. The fact like all of this has been going on for years now, and Chuck gives a biblical explanation from Ezekiel and Daniel. And all of this is just tying into the end times. So I'd love to know what you guys think about this. But also, we don't have to be afraid. And we need to be praying for the people who are living in Israel and Iran and people who are dying. It's sad. It's awful. So we want to just ask for God to bring peace, because at the end of the day, it's difficult. But we just do know that Jesus is returning. We want to be ready to keep on living for Jesus and make an impact for the time that we have on this earth. It could be 50 years, 10 years, 5 years, but we don't know. Only God knows. And I would love to know what you guys think, because this is absolutely fascinating. But if you've never decided to follow Jesus, I encourage you to do that today. I promise you it will be the best decision you can ever make. In the description below, you could click a link to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today.